Hey Undergrounders, so I wanted to try this live video feature. Never done it before, so let's see how this goes. So basically, you guys are 4,500 subscribers, and I really appreciate you, but I haven't uploaded anything for about 5 years. And I noticed there was a few comments from you guys about what happened to me, am I still alive or whatever, but I've got a pretty good excuse, I feel, in that I've been knee-deep in a book-to-film project. So it's something. The title is, you may be able to see it in some of the posters behind me. There, and there. Right. So the title was Anno 2020, and it started out as a book, and this has taken 5 years to then turn into a movie. So book to film. And it has what I think you guys will appreciate, which is underground knowledge in it, what I call underground knowledge, which is things that were suppressed from the masses during this time. So Anno 2020 stands for, as many of you will probably know, Anno in Latin means year, so it's year 2020. And it's all about the year 2020. So it's set around the world. We shot it in 17 cities around the world. And that's on, we even use 4 different languages at times. It's mostly English, but we have other languages as well. But that's shot on 4 continents around the world, in 5 countries and 17 cities. So it's an epic around the world mystery drama. And the key thing I want to highlight to you guys is that, yeah, it has what I call, as I said before, it's got what I call underground knowledge in it, which is my sort of umbrella term for anything that it could be conspiracies, it could be things that were not popular at the time, things that were suppressed, underreported information, and so on. So I think this film and the book as well, but I think the film it comes out, by the way, in 2 days' time, so September 13. The link's in the description. So please consider go to that description and subscribe to the channel, but also hit the notification bell so that you will get a notification when it goes live on the 13th. And that's our world streaming release. We did have a cinema. We went to festivals and we did have a limited cinema release here in Australia. But now this is the first time that the whole world can see it. But what I want to say about the movie, before I get into some of the themes that we cover, if anyone's got any questions, put them in there. I don't know who's watching, but I'm just getting this out there. This is an old channel that I'm trying to resurrect here. But the key thing is that the one key thing that I want to highlight is that this movie has essentially been blocked by gatekeepers. So I can give a few examples of that. So as I said, we did fairly well at film festivals and we won some awards and so on. But here's an example, is that there's a top, well, I won't say top, it's not a major, but there's an Australian distributor here who specializes in movies that are having a hard time getting a release. And I won't name this person, but initially they said, yes, this is the type of thing, we really want to help you guys. Then they saw the trailer, and as you'll see, I'll put the trailer, or you'll see the trailer. I haven't put the trailer in the description. I've just put a link to the actual full movie premiere that's coming up, which you guys can all watch for free. Anyway, this distributor here, who they've set up a streaming platform, and again, I won't name them, but they were very interested. They said they knew some of the actors we had. We've got a pretty damn good cast for a low-budget movie, and they're primarily set up to help Australian movies get distribution that are having trouble. And then as soon as I saw the trailer with all the controversial themes in it about the year 2020, that we got a detailed description or detailed response about why they would not want to release it. And off the top of my head, unfortunately, I haven't got it here. I should have kept a copy of that ready for today. But I remember phrases like they said, they wouldn't want to give to, they said they're looking for a strong voice, not a choir, which implied they thought it was like too many opinions. But for me, that was the problem with the year 2020 is we couldn't get. My goal with this movie was to give a smorgasbord of opinions about what happened during this year, whether it's lockdowns, whether it was the beginning of the vaccine, whether it was, we needed more opinions. I believe we'll look back in hindsight and go, we just needed more discussion, and we weren't allowed to have a smorgasbord of opinions. It was more, these people are deemed misinformation, so we're going to silence them and so on. So this, basically, I'm having trouble remembering the exact details, but we got a series of emails from this person, which said this head and founder of an Australian small to medium-sized streamer, and a type of distributor, basically saying that they wouldn't consider it because they believe we're leaking misinformation. Whereas what I want to say about this movie, even though I do have some conspiratorial thoughts about the year 2020, is that I believe it's an immature filmmaker who would make an agenda movie or make it about one opinion. So I basically just put various characters in the movie that have all sorts of opinions, including very mainstream opinions about the year 2020. And it shouldn't be controversial. To me, this movie is not controversial. We have characters exploring all sorts of things, philosophies, family values, and that sort of thing. But on top of that, I'm just seeing some comments there. You're curious to know how people will view the event in future. Yeah, that's basically, so thanks for that comment. But yes, basically what the hell was I talking about? Jeez. Hang on. Well, let me go on and I'll remember it. So essentially, I remember now. So we're showing various opinions, and it's all over the show, and we're exploring a lot of different philosophies. And some of this movie could have been told before the year 2020, but I decided to set it in this period because it heightened the intensity. So a lot of the stuff is very mainstream as well in the movie. But then just because we have certain characters, and I myself, so I should have mentioned that I'm the writer, I'm the novelist, but I'm also the director of the movie. But I play a small role where my character is one of the characters that is mentioning alternative theories about the year 2020 and what was going down, whether it was lockdowns, whether it was social distancing, having to wear a mask. And we've got several other characters like that. But then we've got other characters that are petrified of COVID and so on. But I believe that's what if you think about any other event or major, current event, let's say, we generally have a lot of different opinions that make it to the mainstream. Like here in Australia, there's a show, I think it's called Q&A. And I think this is based off a British one, the same sort of thing. But every country has something like this where you have politicians who face the audience, and the audience members come up with questions. Now, probably that's a little bit curated, but what I mean is it allows everyday people to voice things. But I noticed during this time, I've never seen it really wasn't just a lockdown of our movement and our freedom of movement. There was a lockdown on that. But I think there was a lockdown on being able to use our voices. There was often no way to get out. And so if you weren't paying attention, most people wouldn't have been aware that there was anything controversial going on because they completely silenced us. So what this movie does is it allows those opinions that did get silenced to finally get a voice. Now, personally, I think there won't be a movie anytime soon that does this. And the reason is it's kind of a cool thing. Like every filmmaker wants to get a big budget. We didn't manage to get that. And me and my mate, Gilbert Moshe, who's a producer and an actor and plays one of the leading roles in this film, together we self-financed it. So what that means is, and that's really, really hard. Like you've got a low budget movie, it's not the ideal state, but in hindsight, it was perfect because what it allowed us to do is just basically, especially for me as director, it allowed me to basically explore anything with no censorship. Now, this is really rare even so-called indie films, they're usually associated with a big studio, or there are very, in fact, I will go so far as to say there are almost no indie films in the current era. And if you go back in time, indie meant truly independent. And the advantage of that, if you're not dependent on anyone, it's like in real life. If you're not dependent on anyone for money, then guess what? You've got total freedom to do what you want. Or likewise, as a filmmaker, because we didn't have a distributor, we didn't have a say a TV channel or a major production company, we were doing it all ourselves. On top of that, we didn't have a corporation we had to answer to. There's no, a lot of so-called indie movies, and that term, by the way, got co-opted. At a certain point about the 90s, the big studios recognized, indie is a popular, everyone's loving indie movies. So then they basically are repackaging their own movies, but calling them indie, but they're not, because the filmmakers are beholden to people. And as we all know, it's been commonly reported, and I think most people agree, is that there's a real agenda with a lot of movies these days, and filmmakers are hamstrung, and they kind of have to play the game. And I think in this era of corporatization of the arts, it's a big, big problem. And people, as soon as they do speak their mind, as I'm sure most of this audience will know, you guys, you undergrounders, as I call you, you guys will know that it is a real, it's becoming a real problem, and that you really wonder with a lot of artists, is that their true opinion, or are they just saying that? Are they, sometimes you get a sense that they've got an opinion, but they're withholding it. So this is a movie that, and as I say, it would be very hard. Look, any other movie on the year 2020 will require quite a big budget. Now, we did it in such a way, we got around that with some tricky maneuvers. But one of them was that we shot it a little bit docudrama. So we did a technique called cinema verite, which allows directors to put actors in the real world. So because we were shooting it real time, we didn't have to recreate scenes. What we did is we put people out on the streets during lockdown. When Black Lives Matter was happening, which you remember was like May 2020, we had an actor playing a journalist at the event. Now, and so we've got like the equivalent of 10,000 actors, but 10,000 extras at that event. So that would cost, like the likes of Hollywood, to recreate that would be megabucks. You'd have to shut down streets in Washington, D.C., but we filmed a lot of this live during it, albeit it's based on my novel, and it's a fictional story, but we put our fictional characters in real world events. And that's one reason how we, as a low budget movie, we got this epic scope. Okay. But any other movie that comes along, I promise you, they're going to need a budget of at least 5 million, maybe tens of millions, to recreate 2020 and explore this. Then the problem with that comes, well, how do you get that money? That's not normally something that would be for indie movies, especially true indies. So they're going to have to be associated with a big corporation, let's say Disney, or let's say Apple, or whoever. Then you've got a problem. Well, are they going to want are they going to be worried that the themes we explore will reflect badly on the corporation? Then you've got censorship. And so what other filmmakers do is then they'll go, well, we need to compromise a bit. That's what producers encourage directors to do. But the problem, what I'm banking on when we release this movie, and we're going straight to the public on these types of streamers, including YouTube, is what I'm hoping is that you guys recognize that this is something that is just totally unfiltered. And this is cool because the sort of opinions that everyone had in the background, everyone was going on, in secret, whether you met up at a barbecue, whether you were at workplaces and so on during this time, whether you were locked down and discussed talking with people on Zoom. These were the types of, this movie includes opinions about what the lockdowns might have been about, what the virus might have been about, what the vaccine mandates might have been about. It includes those opinions, and these are included in the story. So anyway, we sort of have, there's references to things like even topics like exploring the 5G technology, transhumanism, these types of things, and then the actual lockdowns, the what was behind that. Are we being controlled? Is there sort of a propaganda outlet? Now, is this a huge part of the movie? No, it's there. But I would say the main part of the movie is that it's essentially what I'm trying to do is hold up a mirror to society. And I don't want to ever let my personal opinions interfere with what should be just a pure thing, where I was writing, not only were all of us actors living the project as we're acting it, but on top of that, I was writing it during the year 2020. And so I didn't have any answers, and I'll still say I don't have answers. This movie just offers questions. But what I was going to say is that the effect of this era and the decisions that some countries made, and remember, not all countries locked down. Like it's underreported that Sweden, for example, but Japan was another that barely locked down, but Sweden chose not to lock down at all. And what's been forgotten is as soon as that happened, everyone said, oh, they're going to pay for it. They're going to have a death toll through the roof. Guess what? They had no higher death toll than anywhere else. But then they say the lockdowns were absolutely necessary. No doubt we had to do that. But then, so I think Sweden alone debunks that theory. And as more time goes on, people wonder what was really all that about. Like ultimately, the death toll of COVID, as we see more and more research that comes out, and again, this is still being suppressed, but more and more research is showing that people died of COVID. Sorry, people died with COVID, not of COVID. So an example of that is once here in Australia, it came out, this was probably a year later, and the damage was done by then, but it came out that the average age of people supposedly dying of COVID, and again, I think this was with COVID, but anyway, the bottom line is the average age was 89 years old. So extremely old, sick people who had other diseases and just happened to have COVID as well but this wasn't being reported at the time. So, but ultimately, as I say, it's about many things, and much of the film is actually people having to communicate in very restricted ways, not always remotely, a lot of face-to-face, but wearing masks and different things. When you see all this, especially 5 years later, see, I wanted to release this a lot earlier. Like no filmmaker begins a movie and goes, oh, we're releasing this in 5 years' time. Like this is one of the longest movies in terms of our production time. This is one of the longest movies ever made. And a lot of that relates to not having the sort of budget we would have wanted. So I didn't want to compromise, but that meant waiting a long time, sometimes saving up money to be able to do the next phase of the production. And so it's a case where because of that length of time, sorry, I just got distracted because I'm reading comments there. But yeah, it took us 5 years to put this together, and I wanted to release it much, much earlier. But that's what I was going to say, is that ultimately I feel it's perfect timing, because I think 5 years is long enough for people to look back, and suspicions have grown. People who trusted everything at the time are maybe looking back and going, well, was that worth it? So I think it's an interesting thing to explore. But yeah, ultimately it shows people having to, it's really about, it's a film about relationships that as I say, could have been, it's about, say, traditional values, family values, and that sort of thing. And quite sweet themes, I would say. But then it's got this harder edge behind it, because in the background is always this thought and as you see, that footage, as we were editing it, the footage of people wearing masks all over the world, the footage of people social distancing and these quite extreme measures, we just got used to it. My editor and I, Simon Carter, we were just constantly looking at this. We had hundreds of hours of footage, like way more than the average movie. We were just collecting so much. but that became unfortunately, that became our new normal, not just from my editor and I, but the whole public. But now when you look at this footage now, it's like, what, you kind of see it in a different light. And that's why I think 5 years is a good time to release this. 5 years later is a great time to release this movie. So 2025, September 13, 2025, this Saturday it opens. And that's about 5 years since we started. And it's actually 5.5 years since I started writing the book. But it was published in October 2020, but I started writing it in March. So what I mean is, I think if it had released earlier, which I really wanted to release it way earlier, but actually I think it's kind of divine timing in that I think we all needed we'd had sort of lockdown overload or COVID overload from just over reporting of that event and the hysteria and so on. But now I think it's good. We needed space. And now in this movie, to me, and many people have commented so far, and reviewers and so on, it's now interesting to look back. And again, going back to that mirror analogy, is that just looking back at the event now and looking at the footage, it's like we've captured the zeitgeist of that era. And to look at it and go, what, you can live through something, but sometimes that's the power of the camera, is that, and movies in general, is that if you sometimes, and the arts in general, is I think we need stories to be able to see, to be able to get objectivity with something we've all lived through. And so I haven't tried to color it with personal opinions. I have my own personal opinions, as you may be able to pick up from this whatever this is, podcast or live stream. I have personal opinions, but again, I think it's an immature filmmaker who tries to infuse that, and it becomes too heavy-handed. And I think that's more for the documentary space, but for where you really put a strong opinion. But I think the job of a director is not to do that. It's just to not judge any character. You have a bunch of characters, and my characters, when they're arguing about things about 2020, what I think's exciting is that when you strip away the characters, it's really, each character represents a different mindset or worldview. So then you've got, if you look at it from another angle, a story like this isn't true of all movies, like comedies or lighter drama, that's not true. But with dramas like this, which has a certain intensity, I believe the characters represent competing philosophies. And it's fast. So when you get these, and you don't judge it as a director, you just pit them up against each other. It's almost like setting up a sporting event, right? This is the way I look at it. And then you pit these characters against each other, and you cast great actors. And the thing I should say is that a lot of this film was improvised, which gave it, and people were infusing their real life experiences they were experiencing during COVID. The actors were actually living it, and then they would put that into their character. So we went way beyond what I wrote, which I felt was necessary, because there is a slight docudrama aspect to this film. Not much, but it's there in the background. And so they improvise stuff, and again, going back to that idea of competing philosophies, which the characters represent, when you pit them up against each other, it's a sort of thing that it makes you think, including me as director. It sort of gave me new insights. And sometimes it wasn't a case where one side is right or the other side is dead wrong. It's like, then when you've got two people arguing, it's like then there's a third opinion, which is an amalgamation of both. And we start exploring the gray areas. And I was learning during this time, and I still, right up to the end of editing this, I don't necessarily have answers, but my job, I believe, or the job of any director, is just to ask questions, and that's all this movie does. But again, during this time, 2020, or even now, there's been no movies, and I'm not expecting any, to be honest, that maybe documentaries, but I mean feature films, because you generally need, especially for a topic like this, an around the world movie, you generally need quite a budget to be able to do that. And again, that goes back to quite a budget means you're going to have to be in with some major corporation. You're going to have to be in with distributors and so on. And we know with like the Hollywood studio system, everyone knows now that they've got a political agenda. We see this if you step outside this sort of movie, if you go to military movies. So they often, the military movies, let's say movies like, I won't mention any specific movies, but you know all those movies that came after 9/11. So we've had now 20 plus years of, and it's interesting, Australian time, this is September 11th. So I'm recording this, I think, on the 24th anniversary of 9/11. So if we think of all those movies that came during the war on terror, the wars that followed 9/11, all those years, and then after the war on terror ended, the continuation of all these style of movies, they generally have budgets in the tens or hundreds of millions. The problem with that is that the producers partner with, so it's not, this is where I'm going, it's not just, the studios are not just collaborating with the political parties and so on, and the political infrastructure, and let's say the elites as well, if I can use that term. But they also do things like working with the intelligence agencies and the military. So what's a really bad thing is that, let's say I write a script now and I get it in that Hollywood studio system, and it happens to be about the Middle East wars. But then in order to get that financed, the producer goes, well, we could save a lot of money if we can get frigates, so Navy boats, right? And we can get fighter jets from the military as well. And if we can save on the budget, we could get all that for free. But all that's necessary is suddenly the Pentagon and the likes of the CIA, they have to verify everything, and they will recommend changes to make their, I won't say the United States, because I don't believe their military system reflects the people of America. I will say the military industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned about in his presidential farewell speech, if you remember, in 1961 from memory. Or probably that was late 1960, one of the two. No, probably January 61, I'd say. So the military industrial complex will have to verify certain things about your script, and they will, or not just verify, they will want to modify things. Then the producer will pressure the director and the writer, or let's say if it's a case like me, like a writer-director, suddenly I've got to modify my script. But if I do that, there's a great reward. The reward could be we get $20 million worth of medical equipment for free. That's built in. But then so that's why the likes of, and then the military views it, that's propaganda to be able to influence the masses, to be able to justify wars and so on. And that's just one. Now that doesn't relate to a movie like Anno 2020. If someone tried to do a movie on the year 2020 in a big budget way, they could do that, and it wouldn't involve, you wouldn't be going to the military, I don't think, maybe the CIA, but you'd be surprised what these top producers in the Hollywood studio system, who they get involved with. So as discussed, one is definitely the political system. Then the other would be the elites or higher powers, or whatever you want to call them. Another would be the likes of the UN and so on, these international bodies. Then you would have, for some movies, it would be the military, as discussed. And then you get into, like, they partner with Wall Street. So you've got big financial systems. Then you've got, now in a movie like this, you might, if they tried to do it within the Hollywood studio system, the opposite to the way we've done it, then you would have things like, the medical infrastructure. So I've seen movies and TV shows that were sponsored by Pfizer. So what chance would I have of, as a writer-director in that system, where they're going to allow me to do that? Because if I'm bringing up common opinions and fears about the vaccine, then what chance would I have? And the answer is zero. They wouldn't even allow me to attempt it. Now, if we go, I'm mentioning Hollywood studios, but if we go outside of that, and this is where I want to reflect more on the term indie, which again I maintain is a term that's been hijacked, and 99.9% of what's been called indie is not. And the original term of indie meant it. What started out in punk rock, actually, in the late 70s. Then it was used commonly in music, and it was people who just self-distributed and made themselves their own album. That was independent, the true meaning of it. So and then that term indie, there were these films in the mid to late 80s that really were, hang on a minute. They really were independent, okay? And then at a certain point, And at a certain point, the studio system recognized, holy shit, the people love this. They really like indie. And so they started to repackage movies, and from about the 90s onwards, that you'll find if you research them, they had big corporations. It was an arm of Paramount, it was an arm of Disney, and so on. It was an arm of Apple. It was, you know, part of Sony, and they set up what they called indie divisions of these major corporations. Now, were these movies slightly more independent or semi-independent? Yes, they were compared to the main ones, but they're still part of that. Even if a big corporation has a division that allows for more independence, it doesn't mean that they still can't demand their agenda to be recognized. So again, from about the 90s, they started to call indie movies they started to call non-indie movies indies, because they recognize that there's a cool factor with this. There's a perception that the director could do whatever he wants. And in most cases, it was anything but. So one thing I can promise, whatever you guys will think about this movie, I can promise that this is a true indie. This is a throwback to those, as I say, for a while there in the mid to late 80s, there were real indie movies. They were often low budget, they were often self-financed, or a private financier gave them money in such a way that they gave the director total freedom. So this movie is a throwback. This is my first as director, but it's a throwback to what I believe is I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, the French word, or it's either auteur or auteur. I think it's auteur system, but the auteur meant the director is the author. And what that meant was so I believe, even though I'm a writer-director, so I've written a novel, I've written a screenplay adaptation, but at the end of the day, I believe in this logic that the final stamp of the movie should be the director as author, no matter what the screenwriter has written. So this means right up until the last minute, and this is what happened with the editing of this movie, is I was making decisions, albeit with my editor, Simon Carter, a brilliant guy, by the way. But anyway, I was making decisions right up until the last minute about changes I want to make. And this is the freedom of this. That's what an indie director can do. And so this is a throwback to the 1970s cinema as well, when you had all those kind of rebellious directors saying and that for a brief period there in the 70s, directors actually, even in the Hollywood system, had quite a bit of freedom. But that was soon stomped out. These days, movies are generally, the power players are generally the producers and the studio executives. Now, I lost my train of thought again, sorry, but going back to the studio system, if we step outside of the studio system, go beyond Hollywood, generally in places like here in Australia and New Zealand and Britain and many countries around the world, they're making movies out, and these will often be called indie movies. They're making movies outside of the studio system. And if they're up to a certain budget, let's say 5 million or so, they don't need a studio involvement at all. They don't necessarily need, even on the distribution end, they can make it independent of all that. But the problem is with that is that those movies are financed by funding bodies. So then you're not in the private sector. You're now with government, and that brings its own agendas. You have to please them. And some directors, it depends on the story. I won't say every story. Some movies, it's better off to make them and to compromise. I'm not going to judge everyone who does that. But with a movie like this, it really, on the year 2020, when so many people are being suppressed, I felt we needed to go, not that I really had a choice. This is too dangerous. Because the first thing they're going to do is read the novel, which is full of alternative theories on the year 2020, right? So not only would the private sector, so the studio system, they're not going to finance that, but on top of that, the government system will not do that, because that's the same government that was enforcing these lockdowns. So then suddenly a film funding body that's financed by the government would then be biting the hand that feeds them, and they would likely lose their jobs over something like that, or more likely, I just think they just wouldn't finance it. There might have even been less of a chance to finance a story like this through the government funding bodies than there would be through the studio system. So again, to go back to the indie concept, movies in the government that are being financed with government finance, and this is especially common, say, in the British Commonwealth, so Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Britain. These sort of countries, most of their movies that are so-called indies are financed through the government. And to me, that's still under the original definition of what an indie meant. It wasn't that. Indie was something really exciting, because when you think about it, the arts have been so corporatized now. Like, here's an example: a musician like Jim Morrison would be instantly cancelled. Maybe even some of the things that the Beatles said, especially John Lennon, they would be cancelled out of it. So now we've got even rock stars, and most film actors as well. They're just so corporate, and a lot of them, I don't blame them. They don't know where to go. They're trying to do movies. Let's say you want to make an historical movie. You need tens of millions or hundreds of millions. But then the problem is, you're so in that system. How can you do anything that's controversial? Corporation, and sometimes, by the way, I've met some of these sort of executives and CEOs of major corporations, and privately their opinions match a lot of the people in the public, a lot of controversial people. But then when they get that job, they either lose their job or they play the game. So the corporatization of the world kind of forces everyone at a certain level, from CEO down, right down to the most junior employees. It forces them one by one to just do what the agenda is. But yeah, so I don't count government finance movies with the film commissions of the world. I think generally that's not independent movies. Those aren't independent movies. So then going back to the concept of having a director who is an indie director, this is exciting to me, because this is the last space in the arts where you could still do something quite radical. And this is what we expect. I think a lot of people are presenting themselves as independent. A lot of the people that have fans, and they think that their favorite film star or their favorite even screenwriter, but directors, are these people who are sort of totally outside the system. And you would be quite disappointed, I assure you, having known some of these people, that it's kind of disappointing to me. It's kind of heartbreaking for me as a fan when you get to know some of these people and you find out they really are playing the game, and they're not as independent as you think. Don't get me wrong, there is still a way to be quite brave within that system, but only to a degree. So that's what I'm banking on here, is that against all odds, it was a case of getting this movie finished was against all odds. But now when we release it, I'm really hoping that you guys get behind it. But also, I'm not asking for support out of nowhere. I'm hoping that I'm presenting a product to you guys and my team around the world. We're presenting a product to you guys that you will recognize, hang on a minute, we haven't seen something truly independent for years or decades. And you recognize this product is of value. And then you share it with other people that we can start spreading the word, even though we don't have that distributor, we don't have that massive marketing budget, we don't have any of that. But I'm hoping that we can stick it to the elites in a way, by just showing them that, but we got one thing, which is people power. And by getting around the system and not being beholden to anyone, I feel a lot of people will be angry with this movie too. That'll show me and my team that we've done the right thing. That'll be proof, because this is something that the elites and so on won't be happy about, because this is what they've tried to suppress. So, all right. Well, thanks for your comments. I read some of them. And I'll get this out there and share this video, but also remember to go on the this is on the Underground Knowledge channel. but go to Anno 2020, the movie, the YouTube channel, subscribe to that, but also hit the notification bell, because get ready. You'll see the link in the description here. Get ready for the actual movie. In about just over 48 hours time, that'll go live. And then, yeah, and I also really am interested in your comments. Once this goes live, I'm so fascinated to see what the world says about this. Okay, guys, see ya.